1 week on from the heat-induced shake-up of the Formula One pecking order at Silverstone, hot conditions at the Spanish Grand Prix threatened to do so once again. But instead, what unfolded was a rather processional affair at the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya, a familiar storyline for the track which ended with a familiar winner. Despite the seeming lack of on-track action, here are 10 things we learned from the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. Mercedes was left licking its wounds following the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, when tyre management woes allowed Verstappen to grab a surprise win. When track temperatures swelled to 50 degrees for the start of the Spanish Grand Prix, and Verstappen got the jump on Valtteri Bottas to leave Hamilton defenceless, there seemed a real chance the Dutchman could put on pressure for a second straight win. But that wasn't to be, as Hamilton had plenty in hand. And after keeping Verstappen at an arm's length in the early stages, he turned the screw from around lap 10 onwards to forge a lead that would prove insurmountable. There was not a single complaint about tyres, and no "tyres are gone, Bono" call to Pete Bonington on the pit wall. Toto Wolff was full of nothing but praise for his team in managing to rectify the mistakes of the race before, and has often been the case after any defeat through the V6 hybrid era, Mercedes bounced back in emphatic style with a crushing victory. Much of the focus heading into 2020 has been on whether Hamilton can reach 2 of Michael Schumacher's long-standing records, once thought to be unbreakable. The win in Spain marked the 88th victory of Hamilton's career, putting him just 3 shy of Schumacher's tally of 91, which will surely fall by the end of the season. Sorry, any Schumacher fans. But another of Schumacher's records was toppled on Sunday, as Hamilton became F1's all-time podium record holder, standing on the rostrum for the 156th time in his career. Hamilton said he felt humbled and honoured to reach such a landmark after the race, claiming an accolade that had belonged to Schumacher since the 2002 British Grand Prix, with Schumacher's final podium coming at the end of the 2012 European Grand Prix in Valencia. Yet it was another F1 great Hamilton seemed to channel in his victory on Sunday. Hamilton said he felt in a daze at points in the car, not even registering that he was on the final lap of the race as he crossed the line for victory. They were quotes reminiscent of Ayrton Senna, who discussed feeling an out-of-body experience during qualifying for the 1988 Monaco Grand Prix. But Hamilton later stressed it was not such an ethereal occurrence that had taken place in Barcelona. Max Verstappen should not be finishing a race any higher than 3rd. But for the 4th race running in Spain, that is precisely what he did, again splitting the Mercedes drivers. The groundwork for Verstappen's charge to 2nd was laid at the start, when he ducked into Lewis Hamilton's toe and managed to vault past the sluggish Valtteri Bottas. Although he was unable to keep pace with Hamilton through the first stint, and had to negotiate some radio consternation with his engineer, Verstappen always seemed to have enough in hand to keep Bottas at bay. Verstappen did not show a shred of frustration after the race either, instead seeming genuinely happy and content with 2nd place. Red Bull evidently lacked the tyre advantage that had put him on course to his unlikely Silverstone win, making any defeat of a Mercedes car a considerable achievement. He may be 37 points back from Hamilton in the point standings, and realistically stand only a slim chance of getting into the title fight, but Verstappen is helping to keep things interesting at the top, a role that really should be filled by Bottas, as we will shortly come on to. So who's been the better driver so far this season? Hamilton or Verstappen? It's definitely a head-to-head the fans and us at Autosport want to see, but based on Sunday's race, even the talent of Verstappen isn't enough to bridge the current performance gap at the front. For all the talk of Bottas 3.0 or whatever version he is onto by now, the Finn proved again in Spain why he is not currently capable of taking the fight to Lewis Hamilton in the title race. Starts have been a weakness for Bottas so far this year, his error off the line in Hungary ultimately resigning him to defeat to Verstappen in the race for 2nd, and a familiar story played out again on Sunday in Spain. Bottas failed to get a toe on the run down to turn 1, allowing Verstappen to move ahead before Racing Point's Lance Stroll muscled his way into 3rd place. While Bottas was able to clear Stroll within 5 laps, it was enough time for both Verstappen and Hamilton to pull enough of a gap that the second Mercedes was never really a threat to either of them. Even a decision to switch to soft tyres for the final stint wasn't enough to close on Verstappen, prompting Mercedes to take a third stop late on to be sure of the fastest lap bonus. Bottas was frank in his assessment after the race, admitting he could already see the 2020 title drifting away. He sits third in the standings, 43 points back from his teammate, who he has not beaten since the opening race of the season. Beating Lewis Hamilton requires running as close to perfect as you can week in, week out. Right now, Bottas simply isn't doing that, and it's a tide that shows very little sign of turning. As Bottas found himself being squeezed out by a pink Racing Point car into turn 1 on Sunday, it would have come as a surprise to some that it was Lance Stroll and not Sergio Perez who was being so aggressive. But should it? Not only has Stroll proven himself to be a superb starter through his F1 career to date, even if from lowly grid positions, but he has been one of the unsung heroes of the 2020 season so far. The pace of Racing Point's controversial RP20 car has certainly helped Stroll's elevation to 5th place in the Drivers' Championship, but he was a close match for returning teammate Perez right the way through the Spanish Grand Prix weekend. Stroll qualified 5th, just 1/10 of a second off Perez, and ran 3rd in the early stages after his lightning getaway. The decision to 2-stop him cost him a place on the road to the 1-stopping Perez, but that was recovered in the final classification after the stewards handed Perez a 5-second time penalty for failing to obey blue flags. It was another fuss-free, mature display for Stroll, who in his 4th season on the F1 grid is removing doubts that may linger over his worthiness of a place in the field, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. It was noted that Stroll was having a close chat with Ferrari's Sebastian Vettel after the race, only adding to the suggestions they could become teammates in 2021 when Racing Point becomes Aston Martin. On Stroll's current form, it's hard to argue that he would be completely out of place going toe-to-toe with a 4-time world champion. The divorce between Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari has long been finalised, but as they come to split up their belongings and get through one final season for the sake of the kids, things are getting messy. But first, let's start with a positive. Vettel produced his best display of the season to date as he made an ambitious, seemingly impossible one-stop strategy work, to go from sitting 12th after stopping to taking 7th at the line. The fashion in which both he and Ferrari got there, though, was complicated. The plan was to always run a 2-stop strategy, with Ferrari putting Vettel onto a set of soft tyres for his second stint after starting on mediums. Vettel got some clear air after the cars ahead pitted a second time and began to push, only to be asked if he wanted to consider going to the end of the race on his current set of softs, with the data showing lower levels of degradation. Vettel was understandably frustrated, having been pushing for 3 laps. He then asked his engineer to crunch the numbers and work out a target lap time for him to get to the end without stopping, something he ultimately made work. Vettel stressed after the race that there was no need for Ferrari to review its strategy planning or communications, but the tension between the car and the pit wall was audible to everyone for the second race in a row. The strategy call may have paid off this time, but there is clearly a disconnect between Vettel and Ferrari right now, and that's unlikely to be doing much for his confidence levels. The question marks surrounding Alex Albon are, despite all of the encouraging messages coming out of Red Bull, refusing to go away. Qualifying was better this time round for Albon, who took 6th on the grid, albeit still 0.7 of a second back from Verstappen in the sister Red Bull RB16. Given race pace has been his huge strength so far this season, it was a good opportunity for him to try and take a step towards his teammate and at least win the midfield battle. But Albon never got the chance. He failed to get close to the racing points ahead in the opening stages and slowly slipped back from both Stroll and Perez as the first stint wore on. The switch to the hard tyre, which, combined with traffic, meant Albon's times also took a hit. Even when Albon got onto mediums for his third stint, he struggled to keep them alive. Albon still can't put his finger on what the problem is, and there's only so many recovery drives one can talk up before you have to question why he's having to make a recovery drive in the first place. The Spanish Grand Prix rarely registers as hosting thrilling or exciting races, such as the difficulty of overtaking around the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya. And the 2020 edition was no different. We thought we'd seen the last of the track in 2019, only for F1 to strike a late deal to keep the circuit on the calendar for this season, which will now carry over to next year by virtue of the revised contracts in the wake of the pandemic. That means we're probably set for at least one more rather underwhelming, forgettable affair, because the track simply isn't good for modern F1 cars. Even in the extreme August heat that some thought could spice things up, drivers were left managing their cars early on, trying to stay out of the wake of the cars ahead. It's hard to follow in Barcelona, we know that, and hopefully that will be remedied by the new cars coming in 2022. But to have points in the race where no car was within a second of any other is a pretty damning reflection of the track's suitability to the current formula. The hullabaloo over Racing Point's brake ducts petered out a little in Barcelona, even if the pop shots between team principals continued. But there was at least clarity over the future direction the FIA wanted F1 to go in. In a letter sent by Peter Bayer, the FIA's Secretary General for Motorsport, to all teams ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, it was confirmed that there would be a firm clampdown on car copying from 2021. The move had been discussed by the FIA's head of single-seater matters, Nicholas Tombazis, 1 week earlier in Silverstone, but the arrival of an official communication made clear just how seriously the sport's governing body is taking the matter. Bayer told teams the updated rules would expressly prevent teams from using photography or other reverse engineering techniques to copy large parts of other teams' cars, thereby outlawing Racing Point's approach to copying last year's title-winning Mercedes W10. The assurances given by the FIA to teams on the matter were enough to prompt McLaren and Williams to withdraw their appeals against the Racing Point sanction. Renault and Ferrari will continue their appeals though, taking it to the FIA's International Court of Appeal. It's good news for those keen to see F1 remain a sport for independent constructors, but could yet open a can of worms over what is and what is not deemed to be copying. All eyes may be on Lewis Hamilton as he comes to finalise a new contract with Mercedes beyond the end of the year, but team principal Toto Wolff is increasingly becoming a focal point. Wolff is also out of contract at the end of the year, and has previously said he would be considering what kind of role he wanted to retain with Mercedes moving forward. The suggestion has been that he could take a more senior role that would see the day-to-day running of the team be handed over to someone else, with Wolff no longer attending every single race. Wolff gave some of his most honest thoughts on his future over the Spanish Grand Prix weekend, and said that the challenge of the sport takes a toll with so much travelling, but added that there was no reason not to continue with Mercedes, but did add, "We will find out in which role." Talks are set to continue between Wolff and Mercedes CEO about the matter. Wolff also said he was consulting his wife, team principal of Venturi Formula E team, Susie, with family matters certainly being a consideration. What were your biggest takeaways from the Spanish Grand Prix? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed for more videos.